I think there's one thing we should talk about.
What?
And it's ESPN. And what's that?
What did they do now?
Well, just all of the Windhorse, Williams hubbub.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
If we don't address it, then what are we doing here, right? So, yeah.
Do you want to just say what it is?
Sure. Yeah. For those who maybe didn't see, basically earlier this past week, Brian Windhorst of ESPN said, "Oh, there's a star that is likely going to look to make his way to the Knicks within the next 12 months. That's the expectation." And then a day or so later, Jay Williams said on his show, well, the player that Brian Windhorst was talking about was Devin Booker. And then he just goes on this long list of reasons why Devin Booker and the Knicks are a match on paper and why that's going to happen. I want to start with Windhorst in the sense that he does this all the time. And you can even see if you go and actually read the transcript or listen to what he says. He basically says like, "Oh, there's a star, but I don't want to say who because it's I don't want to risk that." He's so vague that it's hard to tell who it is, but he says enough where he can say like, "Well, see, I laid down the groundwork to show that this was the player that I was talking about all along," even though I didn't say his name because I couldn't say his name.
Well, I as did you, I'm sure. I listened to it that morning. He says the way I took it as there is a specific player that he assumes will request the trade. I did not come away with the impression, maybe you did, that he knew for a fact that this specific player was already angling to request a trade. I mean, maybe that's too fine a distinction, but
just in the sense that he thinks he has the person, or like he'll give enough clues, but he won't be transparent about who it is because he doesn't want to rock the boat, but he also wants to maybe take some credit when it happens. So
have your cake and eat it too.
Exactly. Well, yes. And for not nice.
Continue, please.
And for Jay Williams, just this idea of Devin Booker. And look, at the risk of sounding like a hypocrite, because I have obviously said on this pod before, I think that Leon Rose is going after Devin Booker at a certain point. There's a very big distinction between saying Devin Booker is going to be a Knick within the next 12 months and Devin Booker down the line could be a New York Knick because of being traded. And the reason for that is because the Suns are the second best team in the West right now. They've got Chris Paul for this year and next year. Let's look at the next 12 months. Chris Paul is under contract for that entire time. You're not trading Devin Booker, period, when you have Chris Paul on your team.
Well, can we say it's unprecedented? When has a star ever in the history of the league been on a contender and demanded a trade off of that contender?
I think the one thing you can maybe say is like Kawhi, if you want to call those Spurs a contender. And I think you could. I think you could definitely make that argument.
That situation was also very messy. He had alleged questions about how they handled the injury and the whole thing. Right. But that's fair. That's fair.
But other than that, yes, I agree. Not only just to leave that type of contender, but also leaving it when you have that much time left on your contract. Yeah. Because there's a reason why these really great all-stars do not leave their teams or get traded within at most 2 years of their contract. It's because teams don't want to trade them. Like the idea of Karl Anthony Towns, who I think a lot of people speculated might be who Windhorst was talking about.
I'll get to that in a second.
Sure. The Wolves front office has no reason to trade him. Zero whatsoever. And you can look at it as a fan and say, well, they're going to go downhill eventually, so might as well cut your losses and trade him for an even bigger haul than you could get than wasting time. And yeah, I don't disagree, but the whole point is you have to look at it from their perspective. The front office has done everything they can to try to work with Karl Anthony Towns. Pulling the plug would be disastrous. It's the thing, like, I kind of look at it with Steve Mills and Scott Perry, where the Knicks were not doing well. They were floundering, and then they tried to make a big move, and that big move didn't pan out. And so they tried, okay, well, we'll try again, right? We didn't get the big fish, but we're going to go back at it and we're going to do something else. If you trade Karl Anthony Towns, there's no coming back from that from a front office because you're already rebuilding, but you also aren't because you may not even have your pick this year if you're Minnesota. So this idea of the front office like hitting reset to try to save their skins isn't something that I think happens because that's just not how they're going to operate. They're going to try to build around the team as best as possible because if you're trading Karl Anthony Towns away, then what are you basically doing that you're not doing right now? you're still floundering. You're still being ass. So if you're going to continue to be ass, you might as well continue being ass with Karl Anthony Towns and not trading, one of the best offensive big men in the league. Again, I understand
in the history of the league,
right?
In the history of the league.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an argument for that. So I get it. I think from a 2K perspective or from a fan perspective, just ripping off that Band-Aid makes a ton of sense. But from a bureaucratic, from a business standpoint, it's not something that we have really seen. I mean, I guess you could say since the Porzingis thing. And again, how did that turn out for Steve Mills? It didn't turn out very well.
No, that's apples and oranges because he was coming up on restricted free agency and he threatened all kinds of nonsense.
Of course, they're not the same exact situations. It's more the idea of trying to pivot in a completely different direction because these front offices don't have that type of runway. Unless things are progressing well and you can buy yourself time, things are not going well in Minnesota. They don't really have time on their side. They've got a small window to do it, and they want to build with Towns.
I don't know that I believe you're saying they have a small window because Towns is expiring in 3 years.
No, yes, sure. They're operating on borrowed time. But what I'm saying is that their window is compressed because of the fact that if they trade Towns, then it's what does it look like, right? They're just still a bad team, but they're with a bad team without Karl Anthony Towns.
Yeah, but I think they've proven that they could be a bad team with or without Karl Anthony Towns, which I think it plays into this conversation. I think what we're really talking about is if and when he goes to them and he's like, I'm ready to move on now. I want to go here. And I'm going to make it public. And if you don't do this, then it's going to cause you a headache. Do they push back and are like, give us more time, or do they willingly acquiesce like the folks who traded Kristaps Porzingis did? And that turned out to be for the better. I guess the thing that is interesting to me about the situation is they can reboot this thing pretty easily. It just simply because they just hired a new coach. They hired a new front office. It's 1 season ago, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rosas, right? Yeah. So Rosas has been there for whatever,
Season plus. Yeah.
Yeah. Season plus. So there's a runway there. The team's going to get sold at some point, we think. You could say, oh, well, if they trade Karl Anthony Towns, then it screws up the set. No one's coming there now, I don't think. So I don't think trading Karl Anthony Towns is saying like we're going to reboot this thing the right way. I don't think that's going to affect things. I just think at some point if he asks out, and I wrote it in the newsletter last week, and I'll repeat it. I was told by someone who I believe has knowledge of what Windhorst was getting at that yes, Windhorst was referring to Towns. And again, whether that means Towns is actually going to ask out and request a trade to the Knicks means it does not. This is Windhorst speculating. That's why I wanted to draw that distinction before. But I don't know. I think we've seen time and time again, the guy requests a trade with 1.5 years left on the contract, or with almost 2 years left on the contract, a little bit into the second season. That is currently the standard. Yes, it is. It's currently the standard.
But the point is that when we've seen who have we really seen it, right? We've seen maybe
we saw
Paul
it from
George.
Davis. We saw it from Jimmy Butler.
But Davis had an opt-out. That's the other thing.
Whatever.
Jimmy Butler was in a different position. I get what you're saying. Yes. Yes, I agree. It's not like completely out of the question. What?
Kawhi
had a year left. And he was injured.
Well, we don't need to get into the Kawhi. That situation started going really downhill when he just started sitting out games when he may or may not have been healthy enough to play them in the beginning of that, second season out.
But I'm saying from the point where he was traded to the end of his contract, it was only one season.
You're right. You're absolutely right. You're 100%.
Right. And the idea of we just don't see these guys move. Like we saw Paul George with 2 years left on his deal, right? And the only reason that he was moved was because it was a blockbuster move with Kawhi Leonard signing him. So it was a package deal where if you're the Clippers, you feel comfortable making this trade because you feel like you're building a contender.
No,
and I know you're not disagreeing with me. It's just the idea of, and why I don't think he's able to be pried away is that what team is able to take Karl Anthony Towns and match him with a marquee free agent or that already has established talent on the roster and has enough assets at their disposal where they can trade for Towns and retain the talent that they already have.
See, I
don't know if that's where the Knicks can make a play here.
That's the fascinating thing to me is I think if Towns, again, this is speculation out the wazoo here. If Towns is like, I want to be traded, and I want to be traded to go play for the coach that I played for in Minnesota, because I know I've found religion, and I know now that is what I need to be successful. I want to play for the guy who put me on the fucking treadmill, Henry at Kentucky. I want to go play for the guy that convinced me to go play for Coach Cal in the first place. I haven't read that anywhere, but West makes everybody do everything in all things having to do with Kentucky. So whatever, you like, he could do that. And if now we've already seen Masai Ujiri take a situation where a guy said he wanted a certain thing and say, I don't care, I'm going to trade for him anyway. Sam Presti did the same thing with Paul George. The reason I think it's interesting with Towns is I don't think the rest of the league looks at Towns like that those guys looked at George and Kawhi, which is to say, I think they might look at him and be like, is this guy worth giving up all of the things for to bring him here for 1.5 to 2 seasons? And then he's maybe go walks anyway. Like, I think there's enough stink on him at this point, and this is not to disparage him as a player, but like, I don't know that I'd want to be the team to give up all of the things for him and hope that, like, that's where I think it's interesting. Whereas New York has all the intel, and like Wes and Payne and Tibbs could be like, look, we either know that we could fix this guy and make him into a centerpiece of a championship team or not. That's the only thing. I think it's a unique situation.
Right. And I don't want to make it seem like Towns is never going to get traded, because I think there's still a very high likelihood that
I think he's going to get traded
at some point be traded. It's just the timing of it within the next 12 months. I just don't see it happening within that window. I think that if you allow for a little bit more time from there, but yes, for Windhorst, it had to have been Booker, who we already ruled out as it's just not going to happen. Towns or Beal. And the other option, of course, with Beal, and the word on the street is that Beal is just not going to move. The Wizards have no intention of trading him, and Beal himself doesn't necessarily want to go anywhere. So again, it was like one of two options. So, and we could talk about Beal, but I feel like we've talked about Beal plenty.
No, we don't have to talk about Beal.
So we don't need to. But
let's move. I think we've discussed this enough. I think it was worth a discussion, because this is something that is going to hang around there, and at some point his name is going to get associated to this. I would be shocked.
it can't not. Yeah.